Okay. Well, welcome back. Episode 4. We excited and happy to be back here again talking about, you guessed it, some more ideas. Today we're going to walk through take a step back in history back to, not sure exactly the time frame. We'll get into that, but something your father worked on with through a very synergistic partnership. We'll definitely dissect that a little bit. And yeah, excited to talk about that. Before that, we talked about your idea book. I think the idea count since we last talked about that was at 122. What is your current count for your idea book?
Idea number 148 was just entered in, and there will be more to come on the idea book.
Okay, well, yeah, just in a short time, another 20 or so ideas. So we got plenty to talk about. That's good. And again, we've talked again about bringing in other people, other guests. So I guess, is there anything specific that you'd be interested in, or anything you'd be looking for somebody who would possibly be interested in coming on to the show to talk about an idea?
Well, there are several people that we could talk to. I think we want to step back for just a moment and remember this is really all about your ideas. So everything we talk about, the people watching this hopefully are going to either get some thought-provoking concepts from our discussion, and specifically to help them advance their ideas from some of the lessons we've learned
Hmm.
in these examples that we're presenting. So I do have some ideas of people
Yeah.
maybe we could bring on to the podcast. You had a couple yourself, so
Yeah. And I guess for me specifically, the only thing really, I would say the only prerequisite would just be, an open mind and like a willingness to discuss, because, nothing that we're doing, I guess, is binding, or any, exchange of ideas is not, there's no one right way to do this. So,
right.
um, it'd help us out just by seeing another perspective there.
Well, and along those lines too, we want to make sure that everyone watching knows some of the people we bring in may have struggled. They may have gone through serious challenges,
Hmm.
and keep that in mind as you're proceeding with your idea. Never ever get discouraged, never give
Yeah.
up, right? Because many obstacles will be encountered, and some of them are perceptual. You need to overcome these things, and some of the great people out there who have accomplished great things in their endeavors have overcome numerous obstacles.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And you see, by the time you hear about a new business, or a successful entrepreneur, by the time it gets to the general public, they have been through a lot, as we've already kind of talked about with some of your ideas, which
Yes, some work, some don't, and
yes.
like you had said in some of our discussion before coming on here, there have been a couple people I think you mentioned, and one specifically who addressed that issue in a positive way, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I guess that's kind of a good transition. I want to talk a little bit before we jump into World Computer Corporation of some of our motivations kind of for being here, and an entrepreneur that I would say has been pretty important in us actually being here now, is Mark Randolph. I was introduced to him. He's the founder of Netflix, but became more familiar with him on a Tim Ferriss podcast interview with him. And I think we mentioned in the past, can't remember exactly what episode, but the concept of, getting your idea out there into the market, into reality, because the time that it has, I guess, getting in front of customers goes a lot further in your learning and developing as an entrepreneur than, kind of in that brainstorming session or just behind closed doors. So I want to make sure that I give credit where credit is due there, because that came up in the past, and that's been definitely a motivation for me. That once a customer gets their hands on your product, your idea, that's going to come up, open up a lot more points of feedback to strengthen the idea a lot more than just yourself could, kind of with your own biases, naturally, because again, the values for the customers, fun as it is to have a good idea, it matters what your intended audience thinks. So
So true, so true. And actually, this is an example. This is a case in point.
mhm.
We had a couple little technical glitches before we came on today, and we said, "All right, let's plow ahead with it." So what you're seeing may not be perfect, but we said, "Let's proceed with this." So the key for you is don't be afraid to put something out there and get feedback. And I really like your point.
Yeah.
We need feedback. That's how we improve. In fact, I think it might have been Facebook. They had a contest where it's like if they would give a bonus if someone could break it, and so they were attempting to crash this thing, and if someone did, that allowed them to proceed. So that's a great mentality, and that's a really good point.
Yeah.
We see it time and time again throughout all business history, and I've read a lot about a lot of successful business people who what you see in the end, as you point out, is not exactly where they began, and they really
Yeah.
overcame some big obstacles to get
Yeah.
to where they are.
And yeah, we were even talking kind of before about some of the, we're in the Detroit area, so the automotive history is very rich here, and I'm, personally involved with that from a corporate perspective. But is there anything that sticks out about what we talked about with, some of those, both successes and failures in what you've been reading lately?
Well, as a matter of fact, yes. Been reading a little bit about Henry Ford, one of your company's competitors, which the history of the automotive industry is fascinating to me. And but maybe you know this, maybe you don't. You know, Henry Ford started two car companies before he actually formed the Ford Motor Company. Um, and both of them, the first one failed completely. The second one actually morphed into what became Cadillac. I could have that backwards. One
Yeah.
of them failed completely. The other one became the Cadillac Motor Company, which merged into General Motors later. Point being, though, he had a vision. He knew what he wanted. He was dealing with some people who didn't necessarily line up with his vision. And so he parted ways with them. And those must have been some troubling times in the early 1900s for Henry, but he overcame it, being the point. So that's one that probably
Yeah.
could do a whole episode on
No, we
good old Henry.
could definitely talk about that. But I really like the combination of going out there and testing your ideas, and then also having that resiliency of, not just letting one small failure define the entire idea, because it can kind of bring that out, and those possibly failures that looked like failures at the start of some of those companies that didn't end up making it out. I'm assuming he learned a lot more going through and trying that than he would have if he would have just spent that time trying to perfect one idea to launch it flawlessly. So
Hmm.
definitely a balance there. You can't just again throw resources into something that has no potential, but you're going to learn a lot when you go out there and do that. And again, that's kind of why we're here. We're recording just, this is the one piece of equipment that we got, but we're passionate about what we're talking about, so we don't want to let that stop us.
Exactly. So don't give up. Don't ever give up, and overcome those obstacles.
Yeah. No, then, with that aside, want to talk about Robert Galbraith. So, again, World Computer Corporation was the company that your father started, not completely alone. I guess before we get too into the company, let's get a little bit of background on Robert. I can't remember exactly where did he grow up, around here, or and then maybe some of his early before getting in with
Sure,
his
sure.
partner.
Yes, this was your grandfather. My father started a computer company, and actually in 1973 here in Southeast Michigan, which at the time, I don't know if it was the Silicon Valley
Yeah.
at the time, not exactly, but his background was very modest. He really, it's a American success story in a sense. I don't want to go into him too much necessarily, but just again, overcoming obstacles. He was born in the Depression era, uh, man of very modest means. His father worked for General Motors. Your great grandfather worked for General Motors at a time when it was interesting. Before unions, these guys would go up to this gate and say, "Hey," someone would be standing there and say, "We need you. We need 30 people. All right, the rest of you come back in 6 or 8 hours." So very tenuous times, very uncertain economic
Mhm.
times. But he overcame that. Was trained at the University of Michigan. Some of you may or may not like the University of Michigan, but then began work with IBM and learned in the early days in the late early 60s, I should say, in the computer industry, which was really flourishing and
Yeah.
just beginning at the time. but then decided to strike it off on his own. So he was a
Yeah.
real risk taker, which again, for you watching, don't be afraid to take risks, smart risks,
Hmm.
and don't be afraid to pull the necessary resources together. I know we'll get into financing later. That's a real interesting component of this story.
Yeah.
Money is always a big, big challenge, resource, obstacle, and opportunity. So, but anyway, he did some consulting after working for IBM for 7 years, and then ran into a fella named Tom Cunnington, who's also a real interesting story. Could be a whole podcast unto
Yeah.
himself. And they formed what became World Computer Corporation. And what they did was, at the time, the mini computer had become available. So prior to that, they had these big, what they call mainframes, which were a whole floor in a building that did minimal calculations compared to today's technology. But they had the mini, which was a little bit smaller. So they decided and saw a need for an application for what they called in-house computing at the credit union level, which, without going into too much detail, wasn't available then. So they put all of their eggs in, mortgaged the farm, still had to get some investors, okay, but put together a really, really solid product that allowed for in-house computing in a rather niche industry. But there were a lot of reasons that they did it, very intelligent reasons. But there were some very tenuous times. I remember Mr. Cunnington, who was the president of the company. My father was the vice president. He said he went to one of his salespeople, it must have been in the mid 70s, and said, "Hey, listen, we need a sale or we're not going to make payroll." So those types of things will happen. But they put out
Yeah.
a real good system, a real good in house computing system. They were impeccably honest, delivered a good quality product, and became really an industry leader in that niche market, and then did eventually exit
Yeah.
the business, and then went on to some other things. So
Yeah, no, that's a great overview summary. Curious though, so I know a little bit about the partnership dynamic. And your dad was, it seems like, the more technical one. So
technical.
did he get that expertise at Michigan from like studying education perspective? Did he learn that through his time at IBM? Was he just naturally gifted? I'm sure it's some combination of all that, but
It was a
just curious what
combination.
gave him that skill set to bring to the table.
It was a combination of things. Certainly, all of those things you
Hmm.
mentioned. He was very, very gifted uh, with a methodical mind, calculating mind, high level of intelligence, which skips a generation. Um, but then, his training at IBM in the early days of computing
Yeah,
was instrumental, in allowing him to understand the fundamentals of coding. Um, so he was a real bright guy, and they brought a team together too.
yeah.
A very small, modest team to begin with, but that's another principle that, boy, we have so many things we can go into. Henry Ford and some of the other automotive pioneers were also fortunate and intelligent enough to know what talent they needed to bring, and were able to bring that talent together. So that was his background that led
Yeah.
to that.
So
And
yeah, you have the technical on one side, and then on the other side, you have Tom Cunnington, who is just, at this point, a business mogul of multiple industries, and definitely brought that managerial side to it. So I guess, do you know how they really crossed paths in the first place, or
I
curious
do.
about that with
Yeah,
the
yep.
first?
It is funny. You never know who you're going to run into or
That's
when,
so
and if you're
true.
looking for opportunities and people, you'll perhaps find them. But you must be looking.
Yeah.
My dad had left. Your grandpa left IBM and started a consulting company. He did some really neat things. I remember him telling me once about. He put together a program that allowed teachers in the Pontiac School District to call in. They automated this to call in to say they couldn't come in, and then it triggered a mechanism to reach out to other teachers to allow for a substitute teacher. Just real simple, practical types of things.
Yeah.
So he was doing some consulting, and he ended up doing some consulting for the Michigan Credit Union League.
Okay.
And Mr. Cunnington was working in the Credit Union League, as I recall at the time. They crossed paths. I think Tom Cunnington saw this opportunity, spoke with your grandpa about it, and one thing led to another. They began discussion and decided with um, Tom's business opportunity, mindset, and contacts and personality. He was very, very persuasive individual, good with
Yeah.
people, and then the technical side of it. They put it together, and boy, once they got rolling, it really picked up
Hmm.
some momentum.
So that was kind of how they found that market, specifically for the credit space. Um, in financial, there's a lot of opportunity there. I guess, do you know what positioned them well, or what made them? Okay, you said they focused really heavily on that in-home computing for the credit market.
Credit
So,
unions, yep, in-house computing for the
just
credit
curious
unions.
what led them to target that.
You know, they must have seen an opportunity, obviously,
Mhm.
because they were in
Maybe
the
this would be a
industry.
better question for Tom too,
It would be,
but
he'd be a great guy to have us interview. Yeah, he's a fantastic man. But they were in the industry, and
mhm,
that's important to try to focus on something that you're familiar with, um, as best you can, and then surround yourself though with good people who also have some insights and can help you accomplish your goal.
mhm.
So they were in the industry though through consulting, and then Tom's role within the credit union league, what it was
Yeah.
called. So
Yeah, I think that's a big lesson there too. So even if you have an entrepreneurial mindset, but you are working in more of a corporate setting, I mean, that's still a great opportunity to learn that market, to learn what the customers want, because, part of, I guess, what we're trying to get at is it's not always necessarily super separated from a corporate, environment versus something kind of entrepreneurial. So that's really good to see how they leveraged what they already kind of knew about, and knew the market to let them operate in it more effectively.
that is a good point. I think you really hit on something important too, in terms of not everyone may necessarily be in a position to take that leap into their a startup
Mm.
opportunity. Now, you may be able to do some things yourself on a periphery.
Yeah.
Okay, if you see opportunities, don't be afraid to pursue them. But I like that because you want to take that same mindset, that almost entrepreneurial mindset wherever
Yeah.
you are, if that's where you're inclined. Some people don't want to, and that's fine
Yeah.
too. But
Yeah. And
within the office space or world that you're in, world you like that, yes, you can innovate, you can work with the resources you have, you can create and improve. So, path of continuous improvement.
yeah, exactly. Continuous improvement. That's a big one there. And that's, I think, another topic, for anyone listening. Like, just because, I guess, you don't have to go out and start a new company to bring innovation. I think challenging some of these, ways things companies have been doing for a while. We talked about big companies. It's a lot. It's difficult to bring about change, but some of the entrepreneurial mindsets, I think, can bring up innovation that could lead to higher performance in a job setting, and also give you that experience if you do down the road want to try to venture off onto your own and explore self-employment a little more
Quick,
deeply. Yeah.
quick little side story
No,
on
go.
Henry Ford. They did a time study program, and they came in and they were all about efficiency and time. And they came through, and there was a fella sitting at a desk with his feet up on the desk who they said, "Boy, this guy's not doing anything. What's going on here?" So I think the people doing the time study went to Henry Ford and said, "Hey, this guy's not doing anything. This is not very efficient." But it was interesting. Henry's response was, he said, "Well, yeah." He said, "You're right. He doesn't seem to be doing anything." But he said, "I think he was sitting right there doing exactly what he's doing now when he came up with an idea that saved us $1 million a month or something." So he innovated by
Yeah.
sometimes using your mind. Yeah. So that's a cute little side story.
Yeah, yeah, or a process, something manual filing, data that takes 2 hours of your time. If you can come up with one quick program to sort it automatically, or some
Yep.
AI system, put that into terms of like a work-life balance, that could be 2 hours that you could have to advance other projects, or um, have a little bit less of your day booked up to work on more strategic initiatives, whatever that may be. So I really like that example, where if you have one idea, and it kind of brings up the topic too, where this World Computer Corporation was a pretty short duration. Like, if I'm not mistaken, it was 4 years or so
A little
from
more than that, yeah.
start to
They formed
finish.
in 1973, and then they sold to a company in Chicago. Uh, TransUnion was the name of the company. They wanted to get into computers. They were, I think, in insurance or something at the time. But in October of 1979, so they started in summer of 1973. So that's a pretty short window. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, especially compared to some of the other, Ford, that's 100 years later still around.
Right.
But I
Right.
guess, just kind of curious. It sounded like, though, during that time they put in more than 4 years worth of work into this company. So you saw, I'm
They
sure, from
did.
the side. It seems like this was, wasn't all just the sunshine and rainbows per se. And you
No.
talked even
No.
about some of those moments where they were kind of close to the edge. Obviously, it was a big win in the end, but
Yeah,
um,
that goes back to your point about sticking with it.
mhm,
There were some lean times. They worked real hard. Um, and not all of the companies, there were other people in that space. Not all of them made it,
yeah,
obviously. Um, Going back to the automotive world, I think there were 1,500 different car companies. One here in Oxford, which is where we are, Oxford, Michigan. There was an Oxford car company. I think they made one car. Um, but there was also, interestingly enough, a very lean time in the early days of Ford. Their cash ledger went down to like $223.64 or something. They were right on the brink, and they didn't give up. They knew they had a good product. So yes, some of those similar things occur. Is that what you were getting at?
yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it's kind of right in line, but kind of want to come to their exit a little bit here. So you mentioned already they sold to a company out of Chicago.
They did.
After 4 or 5 years ish of spending some good dedicated time on this. Do you know, I guess, if they maintained any ownership? Did they sell the company completely and separate, or?
They just parted ways. That company, as it turned out, did not have. That's an interesting little side story. They didn't have expertise in the computer field. They saw it was growing, and somehow found World Computer in the maze of different companies forming out there, which is kind of neat. When you start growing, the light's going to shine. You're not going to be under a bushel basket. But found them, bought them. My dad and Tom left the company, but they turned out not being able to run it effectively and ended up selling it to a different individual who was like a turnaround guy. And interestingly enough, he found some inefficiencies that existed in World Computer that he converted into even much, much greater revenue. They never grew into a massive,
Yeah.
company, but they certainly had a presence. They were profitable and did a great job. And I think some of the things that they did in the computer credit union world are still kicking around out there.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough,
Yeah,
so
well, they were very early on and kind of setting the foundation, almost defining that industry, because it's just such a big part of our daily lives now, with the finance and internet connection with Venmo, with all these other different, very rarely ever
very
are you
true,
paying for anything with cash. I mean, that's all connected through that
amazing,
system.
very
And I
true.
mean, obviously, can't say it wouldn't have happened on its own, but having that kind of experience, leveraging that, coming together with a new partner, you kind of let them be right on the front lines for that. Really, I'm sure it's an exciting time for them.
It
Um,
was.
and then maybe to kind of start to conclude things a little bit after World Computer Corporation. I know that your father still was, I guess, I know he had some sort of a company after that, so maybe we could talk a little bit about what he was doing once he parted ways with World Computer.
Sure, sure. Well, he still had an interest and a talent in the technical world and
Hmm.
in um, software development. So he actually started another little company called GSI. And I remember him telling me about and showing me some of the programs at the time. I was pretty young, but they developed a word processing program, which was interesting. They developed a amortization calculation program, among other things. So I think it was primarily for business, but it was certainly on the edge of doing some consumer
Yeah.
development type products, which was interesting. And I kind of recall, this
Mhm.
might be a little bit mythological hearsay
Digging
or
back
what.
into the years,
Yeah,
take it with a grain of salt, but the
yeah,
themes are what we're looking for.
your grandpa said at one point he was at a convention and they were displaying their products, and he said he thought he recalled Bill Gates coming by and picking his brain early on. Who knows if that's real or not, but I think he said he thought that that was the case.
Yeah.
But so yeah, he did go on to some other things, and always looking to develop good products that
Hmm.
people need, which is probably the moral of the story. To develop a good product, though,
Yeah.
the theme here is, hey, don't let anything get in your way. Always look to improve it. Don't be so attached to it necessarily that you um, let that impede your progress in development. So it's what the customer needs, which is why we're here, because it's
Yeah.
what you need that we want to try to help you get thinking about. And I think we're open
Yeah.
to suggestions in terms of other topics.
Yeah.
And they'll,
And then just one theme, I guess that's coming to mind too. You talked about afterwards with this, GSI organization. There was the same kind of maybe industry at least with computing, leveraging his skills, and that was what he was doing before World Computer Corporation as well. And I think that, um, that's maybe what led him to be so successful was that was where he knew his expertise was. And even after all that hard work, all of the stress, I'm sure the close calls, he still had that inclination to go off on his own and continue developing products. So
mm-hmm.
I think that could be a lesson learned for somebody out there. If there's a topic that you just can't seem to ignore, or some kind of work that you just can't stop doing, whatever that may be, I think it's important just to not ignore that. Don't want to prescribe too much, but again, like computers and technical side for him, his partner Tom has always been involved with some sort of business, and um, that's what can kind of create the longevity and get you through some of those tough times, I guess. So I think that was a good summary of there. I think we got some good lessons learned. Is there anything else you'd like to share just about that topic and that story before we wrap up?
No, it was. I guess again, the lessons you touched upon.
Hmm.
It was a real great success story. Not earth shattering, but neither of these individuals began with much. They had to
Hmm.
go to the money market. They borrowed some money after they gathered up everything they could themselves, and that touches on some other topics in terms of ownership and some of the risks and rewards of involving other people, because money is a big part of a startup. You need
Yeah.
it, and how you use it is critical. Where you get it is also very important. So I think that about wraps it up,
Yeah.
unless there's something else that
No, I
comes to
was gonna
mind for
say, I
you.
mean, we'll be back for more. We got some other things that we're thinking about and talking about on the side, but we'll go ahead and wrap up there. Thank you, though.
Thank you for listening.